I'll tell you how to apply this if you stay till the end, specifically if you are building or leading in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia, because what you are about to hear is not a story about journaling. It is a story about the most effective cognitive governance system in recorded history, and it was built by a man who woke up every morning knowing he held the power of life and death over 60 million people. Here is the paradox. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful person alive. He commanded the largest military force in the known world. He controlled the economy of an empire that stretched from the edge of Scotland to the deserts of Syria. He had the legal authority to execute anyone, conscript anyone, take anything from anyone. And every single morning, before any of that power was exercised, he sat alone and wrote about his own failures. Not his enemies' failures, his own. To understand what Aurelius was doing every morning, you need to understand who he actually was. Not the version taught in school, but the version the historical record shows. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus was born in 121 AD into a wealthy Spanish family with connections to the Roman aristocracy. His father died when he was 3. He was raised by his grandfather, then adopted at age 17 by the Emperor Hadrian's chosen successor, Antoninus Pius. From that moment, his trajectory was fixed. He would be emperor. What the history books rarely emphasize is how much he did not want it. He had been studying philosophy since age 11. By the time power was given to him, at 40, he had spent nearly 3 decades training his mind through Stoic philosophy. The school of thought founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens around 300 BC, built on a single radical premise that the only thing you truly control is your own judgment. Everything else, your reputation, your wealth, your body, other people's behavior, is in the Stoic framework indifferent, not unimportant. Indifferent, meaning not within your control and therefore not the proper object of your deepest concern. For a man about to become the ruler of the known world, this was not an abstract philosophy. It was a practical system for not being destroyed by the position, because the Roman emperor's job was, by any modern standard, impossible. You were simultaneously the head of state, the commander-in-chief, the Supreme Court, the central bank, and the public face of a civilization held together by the constant threat of collapse. Plague, barbarian invasions, corrupt governors, Senate politics, family betrayal, military mutinies, all of it, simultaneously, all the time. Aurelius faced every single one of these during his 19 years in power, and he managed them. Not perfectly. No one manages the impossible perfectly, but effectively enough that historians still study his reign as one of the most stable periods in Roman history. The question is, how? The answer sits in a private document he wrote over the last decade of his life. He called it simply "To Myself." We call it the Meditations. It was never meant to be published. It was never meant to be read by anyone. It was, in the most literal sense possible, a man writing to himself every morning, working through his own failures, his own fears, his own lapses in judgment, and his own attempts to do better today than he did yesterday. This is the part that most people misunderstand about the Meditations. They read it as philosophy, as wisdom literature, as a collection of memorable quotes. It is not any of those things. It is a cognitive training document. It is the written record of a man conducting daily mental rehearsal. The same mental rehearsal that modern sports psychologists, performance coaches, and cognitive behavioral therapists now describe in clinical language. Aurelius was doing it 2,000 years ago, every morning, with nothing but ink and parchment, and the disciplined application of Stoic frameworks to the specific problems he was facing that day. Let me be precise about what that practice actually looked like. The Meditations are structured around 3 disciplines, a framework his teacher Epictetus called the 3 topoi, or 3 areas of practice: the discipline of desire, wanting only what is within your control; the discipline of action, acting always for the common good, with reservation and without attachment to outcome; the discipline of assent, accepting reality as it is, without the distortion of wishful thinking or fear. Every morning, Aurelius would take one or more of these disciplines and write through it in relation to whatever he was currently facing. If he had lost his temper the previous day, which, according to his own writing, he did more often than he was comfortable with,
This is a
he would
disaster.
write about
You ruined
anger,
everything.
not abstractly.
I can't take this
Specifically,
anymore.
what triggered it, what he told himself in that moment, what the Stoic framework said about that kind of reaction, what he intended to do differently. If he was facing a difficult decision, a military campaign, a political appointment, a question of justice in the courts, he would write through the discipline of action, what does the common good require here? What am I tempted to do for self-interested reasons? What would a person of genuine virtue choose if he was dealing with grief? And he dealt with enormous grief, losing multiple children during his reign. He would write through the discipline of Assent. This happened. It is real. The Stoic does not pretend otherwise. What does reality actually require of me now? This is not journaling in the sense most people understand it. It is not recording what happened. It is not processing emotions informally. It is systematic, structured, philosophical self-examination conducted in writing every single morning before the day's demands began. In modern executive language, it is the cognitive equivalent of reviewing yesterday's performance data before making today's decisions. The historical evidence for how effective this practice was is embedded in the record of his actual decisions. Consider the case of Avidius Cassius. In 175 AD, Cassius, one of Aurelius's most successful generals and the governor of Syria, declared himself emperor while Aurelius was ill and rumored to be dying. This was direct treason. Cassius had already begun building support in the eastern provinces. By the time Aurelius received the news, Cassius had the backing of Egypt, the empire's grain supply. Without Egypt, Rome could not feed itself. The conventional Roman response to this situation was immediate and decisive. March east, crush the rebellion, execute the traitor publicly, make an example. Aurelius did not do that. He wrote letters. He expressed in writing that he was more sorry for Cassius than angry, because Cassius had abandoned his own virtue, which was a worse fate than anything Rome could impose on him. He marched east, but slowly, allowing time for the situation to resolve itself. Cassius was assassinated by his own officers before Aurelius arrived. When the assassins sent him Cassius's head as proof, Aurelius refused to look at it and ordered it buried with full honors. Then he pardoned every senator and official who had supported the rebellion, every single one. This decision is almost incomprehensible by the standards of Roman political culture, where public examples were the primary tool of political control. Historians have debated it for centuries, but reading it through the lens of the Meditations, through the discipline of action, which requires acting always for the common good, without attachment to personal grievance. It is entirely consistent with how Aurelius had been training himself to think for decades. The morning practice was not separate from his governance. It was the infrastructure of his governance. A second example, the Antonine Plague. Beginning in 165 AD, a pandemic, likely smallpox, swept through the Roman Empire. Estimates suggest it killed between 5 and 10 million people over 15 years. It hit the military hardest. Aurelius was simultaneously fighting two major frontier wars against the Parthian Empire in the east and the Germanic tribes in the north, while managing a population collapse at home. He did not panic. He did not disappear into his palace. He raised taxes transparently, explaining exactly where the revenue was going. He sold imperial art and jewelry publicly to fund military operations rather than increase the burden on a population already devastated by disease. He appointed doctors and managed the distribution of medical resources across the empire with an administrative precision that Roman historians specifically noted as unusual. The Stoic discipline of Assent, accepting reality as it is, without distortion, made him capable of seeing the situation clearly when panic would have been the natural response. The morning writing practice was where that capacity was built and maintained every single day for 19 years. Now, here is how this applies to you, specifically to the context of building and leading in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia right now. The most common failure mode of high-performing professionals in those markets is not incompetence, it is cognitive contamination. The accumulation of unprocessed decisions, unexamined reactions, and unresolved tensions that gradually degrades the quality of judgment over time. You make a decision under pressure, and it goes badly. You do not examine it. You move to the next decision. The same error pattern repeats because nothing forced you to confront it. 3 months later, you are making the same category of mistake, with higher stakes. This is what the morning writing practice interrupts. The framework Aurelius used translates directly into a modern executive practice. It requires 3 things: A fixed time before the demands of the day begin. A physical medium, pen and paper, not a screen. And a structured question set drawn from the three Stoic disciplines. Discipline of desire. What am I chasing today that I cannot actually control? What outcome am I attached to that I should hold more loosely? Discipline of action. What is the right action here, stripped of self-interest? If I were making this decision purely for the benefit of the people I am responsible to, what would I choose? Discipline of assent. What am I refusing to see clearly because seeing it clearly is uncomfortable? What is actually true about this situation? You do not need an hour. Aurelius's entries are often only a few sentences long. The length is irrelevant. The structure is everything. The structure forces you to move from reaction, which is fast, emotional, and frequently wrong, to reflection, which is slower, more accurate, and compounds in quality over time. The leaders who consistently outperform in high-pressure environments are not the ones with better information or more talent. They're the ones whose judgment has been trained by systematic self-examination. The morning practice is the training. Naval Ravikant reads the Meditations annually. Ryan Holiday's built a career explaining these frameworks to modern professionals. Tim Ferriss calls them Meditations, the book he has gifted more than any other. Bill Clinton read Marcus Aurelius during his presidency. These are not coincidences. They are evidence of a pattern that people operating at the highest levels of pressure-intensive environments have independently discovered and repeatedly confirmed. The most sophisticated leadership technology available to you was written 2,000 years ago by a man trying to govern himself before he governed an empire. There is one final thing about the Meditations that matters more than anything else this video has discussed. Aurelius never finished it. He was writing it until the end of his life. The final entries were written while he was on campaign on the Danube frontier, in a military tent, in the cold, dying of what historians believe was the same plague that had been consuming the empire for 15 years. He never arrived at certainty. He never solved himself. He never reached the point where the practice was no longer necessary because he had finally become the person the practice was trying to build. He kept writing because the point was never to finish. The point was the daily practice of attempting to be better than you were yesterday, not perfectly, not finally, but consistently, and with honesty about how far you still had to go. That is the Stoic habit that ran Rome. Not discipline in the popular sense, not morning routines optimized for productivity, not the performance of virtue for an audience. A man alone before the day began, writing honestly about his own failures and trying one more time to do better. This is the corporate canon. One video every day. Subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow.